Edmonton Oilers NHL season preview. Let's go. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, this is CP, and today I will deep dive into the Edmonton Oilers, looking at 5 of the biggest questions surrounding this team heading into the 2022-23 NHL season. Question number 1. How good is the goaltending? Now, to me, this is a 2-part question. So my first question would probably be, is Stuart Skinner a legit NHL backup goalie? And is he the guy to help the Oilers win this year? Because heading into camp this year, it looks like the Oilers are willing to give Stuart Skinner a shot to be a full-time NHL backup. And the way I see it, unless a player like Bouchard has an amazing camp, it seems like many people believe essentially it's Skinner's job to lose. And like all good teams, the Oilers can't just rely on one goalie for every game this year. So my question to Oiler fans is, do you think Skinner is the guy who can come in and give the Oilers a solid maybe 15 to 25 games when they need him the most? Or perhaps even more if Campbell runs into some injury problems. Taking a look at the stats, Stuart Skinner's split time between the NHL and AHL last year. In the AHL, he played 35 games, actually won 22 of those games, and posted a 2.21 goals against average along with a .92 save percentage. So overall, pretty good numbers, and at 23 years old, it looks like he might be ready to make that jump from the AHL to the NHL. However, at the NHL level, there's not much of a sample size, as he only has a total of 14 NHL games under his resume. In 13 games for the Oilers last year, Stuart was only able to win 6 games and posted a 2.62 goals against average, along with a .913 save percentage. So overall, not superb numbers. From afar, it seems like there's a lot of unknown to this player, and it remains to be seen what Skinner can do as a full-time backup at the NHL level. So my question to you is, do you think Stuart Skinner is ready to be a legit backup in the NHL this year? Or do you feel more comfortable for Ken Holland to possibly bring a little bit more insurance in to solidify his goaltending? Let me know in the comments below. Now, part 2 of the question. Subscribe. Will Jack Campbell be worth the contract? Because in case you missed it, Campbell was one of Ken Holland's biggest signing this summer. The Edmonton Oilers locked him up to a 5-year deal with a $5 million cap hit per. And it looks like management believe Campbell is their number 1 guy from here going forward. Obviously, at 30 years old, Campbell is a bit of a late bloomer, but he did prove that he is capable of being a number 1 guy in Toronto last year for a huge part of last season. And to me, he actually looked pretty good in the playoffs, as he gave the Maple Leafs a legit shot to win that series despite going down to Tampa in 7. Now, looking at Campbell's stats, he appeared in 49 games last year with a 2.64 goals against average and a .914. So overall, pretty decent stats, not much to complain about there. So I guess the main question is, do you think he is able to build on last year and continue to thrive as a number 1 goalie in the NHL? Because heading into this year, there's a good chance that Campbell will likely set new career highs in games played. We'll probably see him appear in around 60 games or possibly even more. And in many ways, this is a very special year for the Oilers and for Campbell himself career-wise, as this is the first full season where we'll see Campbell pencil in as a true number 1 goalie to start right out of training camp. Obviously, there's some pressure that comes with that, so this could be the year where he just enters his prime and could possibly take his game to the next level. So do you think Campbell will be able to live up to the hype and be worth his contract in year 1? And will he be able to give the Oilers the goaltending they need to possibly contend for the Pacific Division, or possibly go more than 2 rounds in the playoffs? What are your thoughts on Jack Campbell? Comment below. Next question. Will any young players have a breakout year? Now, obviously, heading into this season, we know that the Oilers have their big guns up front, especially in the top 6. You have McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent-Hopkins, Kane, and Hyman, who are all pretty proven players and are capable of scoring and contributing. However, if the Oilers want to build on last year, I feel like they can't rely on their big guns to score 3 points every night. And if some of their younger players could have a breakout year or contribute more than they did last year, then I feel like it would make this team overall a lot stronger. On offense, I feel like 2 or 3 players you probably need to keep an eye on includes Kailer Yamamoto, Jesse Puljujärvi if he doesn't get traded, and Ryan McLeod, as those 3 players are pretty much guaranteed a spot somewhere in the top 6 or the top 9. Now Yamamoto had 20 goals and 41 points last year, which was pretty good, but he's still very young and under 25, so could he take his game to the next level and possibly be a 50 point and 25 goal player? Meanwhile, Jesse Puljujärvi looked really good last year and fizzled out a bit in the second half, but still managed to score 14 goals and 36 points. And if the Oilers don't trade him, do you think he could find more consistency and be a 45 point 20 goal player, especially if he continues to build chemistry with someone like Draisaitl and McDavid and finishes more on his opportunities? Meanwhile, another player I think many should keep an eye on is Ryan McLeod. His stats weren't overly impressive last year, only got 9 goals and 21 assists, but if you watch any Oiler games closely, you can tell that he made huge strides last year and could be a breakout candidate on this team that sets new career highs across the board this year. Meanwhile, 2 other lesser known players who I think if they have a strong camp could fight for a roster spot and be one of the 2 pleasant surprises to make the team this year are Dylan Holloway and Xavier Bourgault. Especially in Holloway's case, what type of impact do you think he could make on the team this year? And could he possibly push out one of their older, younger players like Yamamoto or Puljujärvi out of the top 9 and secure a full-time spot this year? Let me know in the comments below. Meanwhile, on defense, I feel like one of the more obvious names is Evan Bouchard. At this point, it looks like he's guaranteed a spot in the top 4 in the rotation, and he's coming off a career year with 12 goals and 43 points in 81 games, which is already quite high for a defenseman. And surprisingly, he was the highest scoring defenseman on the Oilers last year. So can he up his game another notch and possibly be a 55 or 60 point player this year? Besides that, I feel like many Oiler fans might be more interested in seeing how Bouchard develops his game on the other side of the ice, especially in the defensive end, where many people feel like he needs a little bit more work. And if he can improve in that regard, perhaps being a little bit more physical or be more steady and more consistent, then I feel like it makes the Oilers defensive core that much stronger. Subscribe! Besides that, the Oilers have a few more younger players on the blue line who might possibly take a huge step forward this year and contribute on the Oilers back end. Philip Broberg is another guy who many people are excited about, and it remains to be seen, but do you think he makes the team out of camp and can give the Oilers a solid maybe 13 to 16 minutes a night, or do you think he still needs a little bit more seasoning in the AHL? Besides that, unlike prior years, I feel like the Oilers are pretty deep defensively. As we look at the players entering camp right now, 2 other players who I think might have a shot to make some sort of impact on the Oilers blue line this year includes Markus Niemeläinen, who appeared in 20 games last year and was noticeably one of the more physical defenders on the blue line. Ask many Oilers fans and they feel like he brings something that none other defenders on the team does. So could this be a year where he takes a step forward and steps in and be that solid number 6 or number 7 guy? On the other hand, another younger player who is possibly on the cusp of making this team is Dimitri Samorikov. Now Samorikov is 23 years old and was drafted back in 2017 and actually spent the better part of his last 2 seasons in the AHL developing his game. And who knows, this might be the year that he takes that step forward and cracks the Oilers roster, possibly as the number 7th guy. Personally, I don't know what kind of upside he has, but if he has a strong camp, I feel like the Oilers might be willing to explore that avenue and give him a look. So my question to Oiler fans is, out of all the younger players on the roster, who are you most high on and think will either have a breakout year or play a major role on this team this year? Let me know in the comments below. Question number 3. Will any current roster player get traded? If you have been following the rumor mill over the summer, there were actually a lot of noise surrounding the Edmonton Oilers this past summer, especially on the trade front. As earlier in the offseason, many roster players were rumored in potential blockbuster trades, and popular trade candidates included Jesse Puljujärvi, Tyson, Barrie, Warren Foegele, and Zach Kassian. Now, in the end, only Zach Kassian was moved, and the Oilers did pay a price to move out his contract. But if we look at the Oilers' current roster and their salary cap situation, Ken Holland might not be done making any trades yet. Because the way I see it, Ryan McLeod needs to get signed. Besides that, a few current roster players could be traded from now until the trade deadline next year. And in my opinion, Holland could definitely make a trade for 2 situations. One, to clear out cap space, and a roster spot, especially if a younger, cheaper player breaks in and makes an impact on the roster. 2, if things don't go the way many expect them to, and if the Oilers slide early in the season, then maybe to save the season, Holland has no choice and tries to pull off a trade to give his roster an immediate upgrade. Now, with all that in mind, it's all speculation at this point, but let's assume that one of the two things happen, and maybe a younger player surprises us right out of training camp and makes the roster, or if Holland is presented with a deal that makes sense for both sides and he decides to pull the trigger. So if you or Uncle Ken, do you think any of the current Oiler roster players will get dealt sometime between now and next year's trade deadline? If so, who do you think is most likely to go and why? Moving on, perhaps the two most important questions for the Oilers heading into this season. Number 1, is their depth good enough? A few particular areas I want to talk about is their bottom 6 forward group, and are the current players good enough to help the Oilers go deep in the playoffs and possibly win close games throughout the season? If we take a look at their main roster and their bottom 2 lines, they currently include Ryan McLeod, Derek Ryan, Warren Foegele, Mattias Janmark, Jesse Puljujärvi or Kailer Yamamoto, and possibly someone like Devin Shore or Dylan Holloway. My question to you is whether these complementary players are good enough or the right mix for their superstars and top line players like Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, and so on. Personally, I don't really know. Many people I talk to actually tell me that they feel like this current roster are missing a few elements of the game, including things such as grit, toughness, and shutdown guys who can block shots or contribute on the PK. And compared to the last maybe 3 to 5 years, the Oilers definitely lost a lot of toughness on their team. And if we take a look at their current roster, besides Darnell Nurse and maybe Evander Kane, I'm not sure who else is capable of dropping the gloves. Now, don't get me wrong, fighting is not a mandatory part of the game, but I personally feel like it doesn't hurt to have at least 1 or 2 guys on the team capable of policing the ice and protecting your stars. Honestly, if you were to ask me, offense and scoring shouldn't be a huge problem, especially when you have McDavid and Draisaitl on your team. However, I feel like many can make the argument that other important elements of the game might be missing on this current Oiler roster. Also, if you look at championship contending teams, many of those teams, especially on their bottom 6, have guys who they rely on to be able to shut down the opposing team's top forwards, or sometimes change the momentum of the game by finishing checks, dumping it in the other zone, grinding in the trenches, and just wearing opponents down. Personally, I'm not sure if the Oilers' current roster has enough of that in their lineup. What do you think? And in my opinion, it could be a potential problem in the playoffs when things get a little bit tighter. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong and Holland is trying to build a roster around speed and skill, kind of like what he did with his Detroit Red Wings teams. And maybe it does pay off with the right matchups in the playoffs. So my main question to everybody is, how do you feel about the current Oilers depth? Do you think Ken Holland should go and add more grit and toughness to their lineup, or will they be okay this season? Next, perhaps the most important question heading into this season. Is their defense good enough? If we take a look at the current roster minus Duncan Keith, the Oilers pretty much have the exact same defense as last year, with Nurse, Ceci, Bouchard, and now Kulak possibly in their top 4. And probably the only new additions are their number 6 and 7 guys. And it'll be interesting to see who takes that spot. In my eyes, I could see the last 2 guys being someone like Ryan Murray, Philip Broberg, or possibly someone like Markus Niemeläinen with an outside shot if he has a good camp. Now, we can't forget that as much disrespect this blue line get, the Oilers were able to make it to the 3rd round last year with this defensive core. So it's hard to argue against the results. But my question to you is, do you think their defense is good enough to build on last year or possibly go deeper in the 3rd round or even contend for the cup? I'm not too sure. Like, if you were to ask me, I think I could make a pretty good argument that this defense is not championship caliber yet. And to be honest, they might actually be a few pieces away, especially when you compare their defense to the other 2 teams that made the finals last year. You can definitely see a big difference there. But as a non-certified YouTube hockey expert, what do I know, right? So that's just my take for now. So if you were Ken Holland, do you think the Oilers defense is good enough? If not, what type of roster moves would you make and who would you trade? Comment below. Do you agree or disagree with everything I said in this video? Make sure you let me know in the comments below. And if you like, feel free to call me out as well. If you want to watch more of my crappy videos, then make sure you click the links on the side right here. subscribe.